Happy Wednesday, everyone. My name is Yiling Zhuang. I'm the Water Resources Regional Specialized Agent in University of Florida IFAS Extension Central District. Welcome to the Water Wednesday. Water Wednesday is a webinar series about Florida's precious resource, water. Every Wednesday afternoon at 2 o'clock Eastern Time, we will live stream a 30-minute talk about Florida's water and what we can do to protect it. So we have attendees from all around the world. Please put in the chat box and tell us where you are viewing this live talk. May is the National Wetland Month, so all the Water Wednesday talks in May are centered around the wetlands. And today's talk is a constructed wetland. And our guest speaker is Krista Stump. She is the Natural Resources agent in UF IFAS Extension in Osceola County. So now let's welcome Krista.
Thanks, Elin. I'm going to pull up my PowerPoint here. All right, so as Elin mentioned, my name is Krista Stump. I am the UF IFAS Extension Natural Resources Extension Agent in Osceola County. And today I'm going to share with you about constructed wetlands. I'll do a little bit of introductory about wetlands themselves, but if you want to know more information about that, you should check out some of the other talks from Water Wednesdays this month. So wetlands are called our transitional areas between land and water. And so this can include marshes, bogs, swamps, can even include floodplains or tidal and riparian zones. By definition, it's some slow moving shallow waters. And these are at or near the soil surface for at least part of the year. And this includes the growing season. Because wetlands have very unique water, plant, and soil conditions, there are several physical, chemical, and biological processes that wetlands do that can improve water quality. That's why wetlands are sometimes called nature's kidneys, because they filter out contaminants, nutrients from water. And there are many different processes that they use to do this, and you can see just some of them here on the diagram. But outside of nature, how do we as a society treat our wastewater? So for instance, after you flush the toilet, if you don't have a septic tank and it gets piped, the sewage gets piped away to a treatment plant, what happens? Well, there are several steps that occur, and they're categorized as primary, then secondary, and finally tertiary, meaning the third treatment step. And as the raw sewage is pumped in, first it's screened out, and also any grit, so like larger particulates, are filtered out. It goes to a clarifier, which that's where sediments settle out, and that's all considered the primary treatment phase. Next, it goes to the secondary treatment phase where there's an aeration tank, so air is pumped in it, and this allows for aerobic digestion, so there's bacteria in there that kind of eats away. And then it goes to another clarifying stage. So it does some more sedimentation. And then finally, it's disinfected. And then it either is then discharged, and typically that treated water is discharged to a surface water, so a body of water, or it can also be injected down into groundwater. Sometimes though, it goes to that tertiary phase and it's treated again through another phase of filtering. So why is this all important? Because today we're going to talk about how we have engineered constructed wetlands to do some of these processes for us. So constructed wetlands versus that conventional wastewater treatment train that I just went through, constructed wetlands can provide some or all of the functions in those secondary and tertiary phases. So for instance, they can help with that secondary clarifying stage, a little bit of the disinfection, but definitely some of the filtering in the tertiary phase. So what's the difference between our natural wetlands, those naturally occurring wetlands that we see, versus these constructed wetlands? Well, natural wetlands can be used, and they may still be used today as part of wastewater treatment. However, it's much more common to construct these engineered treatment wetlands. Constructed wetlands, they're designed and created, and they mimic those natural processes that we went through. But because they're constructed, it allows for better flexibility, and also you have greater control over those processes. So there's approximately 1,000 constructed wetlands in the United States alone, and they do require a large amount of land, but they're much more cost effective to both operate and then also for maintenance than those conventional methods of wastewater treatment in that giant train that I showed you guys. So what are those treatment processes that constructed wetlands do? Well, as we mentioned, there's many different biological, physical, and chemical functions of the wetlands. So I'm just going to go through a few key terms associated with that. The big thing that wetlands do to help with water treatment is something called phytoremediation. And phytoremediation is just a long word that means the collective removal or breaking down of environmental contaminants by plants. Phytoremediation is one form of a biotic process, and biotic just means that it's a living organism. So a plant, wildlife, microorganisms are involved in the process. And an example is that aquatic vegetation, those plants in the wetlands, they can take up different contaminants. So they can take up nutrients, but they can also take up metals or organic contaminants that are found in wastewater. There's also abiotic processes, and those do not use living organisms or plants or animals. So instead, for example, soils can help retain contaminants. So what that means is they take in contaminants and then they can bind with them. And that allows us to treat things such as heavy metals, such as copper, chromium, lead, or zinc. So what are those vegetation? What types of vegetation occurs that helps with that phytoremediation? Well, they're categorized in different ways. We can have free floating, submerged, or emergent vegetation. And the different vegetation type, it impacts the function of the wetland and also how it's able to treat those contaminants. So starting on the left in this diagram, we see emergent vegetation. So those occur along the shorelines or just partially in the water, and they're rooted in the soil. Next, we have floating vegetation. Those are the three in the middle, and it can be rooted. So that means it can go all the way down to the bottom, but the plant is floating on top. But we also have non-rooted, otherwise known as free floating vegetation. And then finally to the right, there's submerged vegetation that's completely under the water. However, it's rooted in the soil. Okay, so those are the three different types. And there's different types of constructed wetlands. So there's two main types. We have free water surface flow, FWSF for short. We also have subsurface flow, or SSF. The type that is used in the constructed wetlands kind of depends on what we're wanting to accomplish, what types of specific contaminants we're trying to remove, the design limitations that are there, as well as any regulatory needs. So if we're trying to make sure that we're limiting a specific nutrient, for example, to meet regulations, that would impact which type we would design for. And the two of them are different, both in their hydrology, meaning the way that the water flows through them, and also the vegetation that is used. So that's why I went over those three different types of vegetation before. So let's start with that first type of constructed wetlands. So we have free water surface flow constructed wetlands. And what they do is they have a shallow layer of surface water, and that water flows over a vegetated soil surface. So if we look in this diagram here, it's relatively simple. Water flows in, it flows through the vegetation, and then it flows out. And as you can see too in the diagram, the water is open, so it has open water. And they can be natural or constructed. So even though we're talking about constructed today, you can have treatment wetlands that are natural, that are free water surface flow. And like I mentioned, they include open water, but because it's open water, it can have all three of those types of plants, of aquatic plants. It can have floating, submerged, and emergent vegetation. They also provide many of the same functions as a natural wetlands. So in addition to that water treatment, it also provides habitat for wetland plants and wildlife. So how do they work? As that water is moving through the wetland, particles settle out. And as they settle out, different chemical and biological processes help to take in and uptake those contaminants, and then they're transformed. These types of constructed wetlands and natural wetlands represent about 60% of treatment wetland systems in North America. And they're generally less expensive than the second type that we'll talk about, both to construct and maintain. However, they require more land area. The second type of constructed wetlands are called subsurface flow. So with subsurface flow, the water actually flows beneath the soil surface, and it flows through a porous media. And this could be gravel or clay, or sometimes even just soil. And so if we look at our diagram here, if you can see the blue line, that's the water level. And if you look just above that, that is the top of that gravel or whatever porous medium is being used. So that means the water level is not open water. The water is below this gravel. And the plants are rooted down below, and then they emerge up above. This type of constructed wetland, it only provides habitat for some types of emergent vegetation because it isn't open water. The way that it filters out is primarily through that porous media, so that helps to filter it out. However, bacteria and any of that emergent vegetation that's there can also help to uptake the contaminants. The advantage to this type is that because it's not open water, it prevents any public that might be around it from being in contact with untreated wastewater, or it's partially treated wastewater, right? But it's not fully treated yet, so there's no contact with the public. It also helps to limit any mosquito breeding grounds. They require less land area than the other type, and because there's not open water, it reduces the odors associated with that partially treated wastewater. But there are disadvantages to this type. They're difficult to design and construct, and they're also expensive. They're also prone to clogging. If you think about that porous media, as the water flows through it, that can clog up. So apart from the water treatment benefits of these constructed wetlands, there are other benefits that occur. For instance, if they're able to have different plants there, then you can produce other wetland products. Also, it's a way to store water, and depending on the type of the wetland, it can replenish groundwater. As I mentioned before, it also can provide habitat for wildlife, which helps to support biodiversity. But a really interesting benefit is that many of these wetlands are designed so that people can come visit it, so that it provides different recreational opportunities. So people can come do hiking or bird watching. And of course, after it goes through this, then it releases slower and cleaner water. So what kind of treatment wetlands do we have here in Florida? Well, as we know, if you are familiar with Florida, there is a large amount of wetlands here. And in fact, Florida contains a larger acreage of wetlands than any other state other than Alaska. And this is because Florida is really flat, so it has a flat topography, and we get a lot of rain. So the two mix allows for a lot of wetland areas. Florida also has a very long history of regulating both these natural and constructed wetlands for the treatment of domestic wastewater. So when we're talking about specifically about these treatment wetlands, in Florida, there are 17 natural treatment wetlands, accounting for over 6,000 acres, and there's 21 constructed wetlands, accounting for 4,000 acres. And those are used for water treatment specifically. We have many other wetlands, of course, but these are treatment wetlands. And the majority of these wetlands are free water surface flow wetlands. So it's that first type that we talked about. So to put this more into picture for us, we're going to go through an example of a constructed wetland that's in Central Florida. And specifically, it is the Orlando Easterly Wetlands. It's on the easternmost side of Orange County. So it's almost across the border, the county border there. And it's one of the larger constructed wetlands in Florida. It was actually constructed back in the 1980s by the city of Orlando. And what it does is it treats domestic wastewater that has been partially treated through those conventional processes that I showed you at the beginning. So here on the left, you can see an aerial picture of the Orlando Easterly Wetlands, and it's part of them. On the right there, you can see the way that they flow, the water flows through the wetlands, and there's 3 flow paths. There is on top of the red area, that lighter white area, that's the first path. And then the red area is the second. And then the bottom path below is the third. It is a free water surface flow wetlands. And so in it, there are free floating, submerged, and also emergent aquatic vegetation. So when those surface waters come in, it takes about 40 days for the water to flow all the way through that map that I showed you. That's because it's a huge area. It's about 1,200 acres of wetlands. After it goes all the way through, it then discharges into a canal, and that canal eventually ends up into the St. Johns River. They conduct water tests daily of this using automatic samplers, and then they test them at a nearby lab to make sure that proper filtration is occurring. So after this was made in the 1980s, it was actually found that its treatment capacity far exceeded what their expectations were. And for about 13 years, it was receiving wastewater and doing a phenomenal job of removing phosphorus. However, as it progressed after those 13 years, its capacity for removing that phosphorus, which phosphorus is one of the nutrients of concern that can cause environmental degradation. What happens is over time, the plants are uptaking that phosphorus, right? Plants then die, and then they settle to the bottom where they start to accumulate. And then that phosphorus that's in the plant starts to accumulate more and more. And because there's an overloading of phosphorus in the system, the plants are not as effective as uptaking phosphorus. So what happens is you have to go in there and maintain these constructed wetlands. So yes, for a very long time, for many, many years, it can do fine and you don't have to do any maintenance. But when you do have to do maintenance, it is a difficult thing because you have to completely dredge it. So here are some pictures taken of the process at the Orlando Easterly Wetlands of them dredging it. The top picture there is you have to get heavy machinery and remove all of that detritus on the bottom, so soil and vegetation. The second picture there, after all that was scraped out, then it started to become reflooded. And finally there at the bottom, 1 year after doing this, you can see that it's back to looking like a beautiful wetlands again. So if you remember all of those benefits that I talked about that constructed wetlands have, the Orlando Easterly Wetlands uses those to their benefit because the wetland also serves as a public park. And you guys may have heard of this. It's called the Orlando Wetlands Park. It's located in Christmas, Florida. And there people go for hiking and bird watching. And the Orlando Wetlands Park is actually habitat for 30 animal species that are listed on the FWC's threatened and endangered wildlife list. So it helps to provide critical habitat in addition to treating wastewater. A lot of this information that I provided today was adapted from a document put out by UF IFAS. It's called Wetlands as a Tool for Water Treatment. And if you search that and search UF, you should be able to find that. So if you're interested in getting into more of the technical details of constructed wetlands, I recommend you check out that. So with that, I just want to say thank you. And if you guys have any follow-up questions, of course, you can ask them now, or you can email me. My email address is there.
Thank you, Krista. I didn't know there is a wetland park just in Orlando. That's great. So I know I keep saying that it's Facebook because we host our event on Zoom and there are about 10 seconds delay between Zoom and Facebook. So when you hear that, probably you're still typing your question. So when you are typing your question, I do have a question for Krista because just like you mentioned, most constructed wetlands, they are perfect habitat for birds. So I know you are the natural resources agent and you did a great program as what do you call it? The bird journaling. So
yeah, nature journaling. Yeah.
yes, I love this program. So could you just tell us a little bit more why birds are so attracted to wetlands?
Yeah, so it's because wetlands are such a great system, like overall habitat. Right there, you have that water that's really critical. In addition, though, because it's a healthy, complete cycle with many different plants that attract insects, it provides food as well for birds. So they get all the components of their habitat there. They have water, they have food, the plants and provide great shelter. And if it's if there's proper like tree plantings as well, it can provide some nests for their young. So that's why birds love the wetlands, and especially any of our aquatic birds, they love to flock there.
Great. I like this systems approach. And because for we have attendees, I just checked. We have one from South Carolina, and we have someone from Volusia County. So I'm not that familiar with Volusia County. If you know any constructed wetland in Volusia County.
I'm not familiar, but I could always look into it. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah, if you are interested, feel free to email us. I'm more familiar with is the wetland, constructed wetland in Gainesville. It's called Sweetwater Wetland Park. What I didn't know, I just recently discovered, actually, it's on the top 10, actually it's top 3 wetland visit list. Every year, there are a lot of professional birders just go Sweetwater Wetland Park, see some special birds. It's quite fascinating. So if next time you go visit Gainesville, I highly encourage you to go there. Last 3 weeks ago, I went there. I didn't see that many birds, but I probably saw like 10 alligators just hanging there. All right, I check our Facebook page. I didn't see any questions. I did see some great comments. It's a great presentation. It is very informative. I agree with that. So thank you so much, Krista. And next week, we will Chris already briefly mentioned how to use wetland to treat water. So next week, we will go a little bit in depth. So how we use wetland as a tool for water treatment. So please stay tuned. And thank you, Krista. So hope everyone have a wonderful Wednesday afternoon. Bye now.
Bye, thank you all.